It looks like a dollhouse.
Just wanted to know that's in here.
That's cute. And then are they
That's my father was janitor. Attendance every day.
So I think he has 9. There's a lot of eggs. I don't hear it at my house.
Sorry. Everyone
It says
settled?
he does, but I never hear
Well, I didn't make it up.
Good evening, everyone. Seeing as it's 7 o'clock, I will call the September 21st Tri-Board meeting to order with the Chelmsford Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and Finance Committee. Just a quick note, this meeting is being recorded and televised by Chelmsford Telemedia. Is anyone else recording the meeting this evening? We all please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we get started this evening, I know sometimes we do this a little differently, but where we have multiple agenda items this evening, I think it might make sense to ask questions after each specific agenda item. Otherwise, I think there'll just be too much information if we're going to hold our questions till the end, if that's okay with everyone. So Darlene is first, giving a report on free cash and the fiscal 15 budget. So after Darlene gives a report, if anyone has questions, I think that would be the appropriate time to ask questions. So with that, Darlene, I will turn it over to you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Uh-oh. We may need to share with Vivian there.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and all members of the board. I don't know if this is working. So this evening, I'm just going to present how we closed fiscal 15. We did have our audit complete. The auditors haven't finished their final report yet. We should be seeing that probably in mid-October. The audit did go very smoothly. And just kind of go through, we're starting off with the revenues, total revenues ended. Just to start with the local receipts of the motor vehicle excise tax, which is the largest revenue source under local receipts. Is the motor vehicle excise exceeded the budget of 4.25 by a total of $554,000. So again, we've exceeded that budget line item, that appropriation. Again, I think I've said this before, the last couple of years, we're seeing that line item be over the budget, what we did budget. Again, just watching it, like a 10-year trend, we see that it goes up and then it goes down, because after a while, people are not going to keep buying new vehicles. So we're a little cautious about where we'll be there next year. But we did do very well in that line item. Another line item that was that did well this year was our permitting. We're up 18% from the prior year. And we exceeded the current year's budget amount by $170,000. Where we're seeing those permitting amounts coming in is the solar panels that people are putting on their roofs have helped tremendously in the building permit, because you have to also pull an electrical permit with that. There's other permits that go along with having those solar panels put on your roof. So I think that's the main reason why we've seen an increase in that permitting line item. The other line items that have done well, this was just kind of a one-time revenue source, was the interest on our tax liens exceeded, almost doubled. That was due to the Glenview Sand and Gravel. That was in tax lien with us. We did sell that property off so that we actually got that tax lien money. And the $210,000 was the interest, just the interest portion, which goes to the general fund on that property. And as you can see, the real estate property collection, we're at 98.9 or 99%. You can't get much better than that. We have a very good collection rate here in Chelmsford, probably one of the highest in the surrounding communities. So that's really just where we are there with revenues. As you can see, we did exceed our total receipts. Our total is over $500,000 that we actually exceeded what was appropriated at town meeting. To go over to the expenditure side, In this report, it starts with the original budget, anything that was voted at town meeting, and then gives you the new budget amount, and then the expended amount with encumbrances. And as you can see, we've had about $600,000 worth of encumbrances. Turnbacks, as you can see from the departments, that's money that's actually going back to the general fund, which holds our free cash. We did have a big turnback from public safety. I've spoken on this before. We actually had a 911 grant that helped there, and we also had a change where we had a new chief coming in, so the salary from the old chief to the new chief also offset that budget line item. We had returns from the finance committee, budget insurance, and then the debt line item. So those were the things that got returned back from the expenditures for each department. We did have about $670,000 worth of encumbrances. You can see in those departments, the majority, half of that is the public education line item. That is because they reserve what they have left because they're going to be spending through the summer. So that's a reserve that we do pretty much every year, that they reserve all of their money, and then those purchase orders are then put through the summer for their spending for the next year. So we did have our free cash certified. It did come in at the $2.2 million that I anticipated. So I just kind of put a little chart together of what those free cash sources were. Again, as I spoke, the return from the departments, and then some revenue sources that I did speak about on some of those line items also. Then is pretty much what makes up those revenues, free cash. The next page is really how free cash is determined. You basically have your undesignated fund balance. It's just kind of my equation. This is how I come up with it, is that when I close everything out, I have an undesignated fund balance. You take out your left receivables from personal property and real estate. You add back, or you deduct any negatives you have on your balance sheet, and then add back your deferred revenue, which is revenue that you set aside, gives you your free cash. That's really the equation and that is the equation that the DOR, I think everyone got that sheet from the Department of Revenue. When they fill it out, this is really how they come to the conclusion of my free cash. What I did do under the free cash analysis, and I know Paul will be talking about this further, is the uses of free cash and what we're looking at for the town meeting warrants and town meeting and using the free cash. All of the following reports are all out of Munis. These are the revolving accounts. Council on Aging lunch, the school lunch program, the revolving accounts, just a various amount. I run them by fund. Fund 24 is all of the school grants. Fund 25 is the town grants. Fund 26 is kind of the donation accounts, specific accounts. Money is donated or put into these accounts for specific reasons. If anybody has any specific questions on any of the line items, I'd be happy to talk to that. That's really the end of my presentation. If anybody, again, I know Matt said if anybody has specific questions on anything, feel free to answer those for anybody.
Any questions? We can come back later, but now's the time.
My
Kathy?
only question is
Can we get? Okay. Thank you, Paul.
I'm sorry. I wondered if you could speak to the $170 or so thousand in insurance and benefits that came in under budget. Was there a reason for that, or?
Yes, I'm gonna have John John has on the benefits line.
Yeah, we had one of the budget lines injured on duty, which is medical insurance for public safety personnel that are injured on duty. One of those lines was expended under budget. We also usually carry a contingency in health insurance because the budget is over 10 million. So we carry a small contingency so that if we have people sign up during the year, like people may have life-changing events or want to come back onto the insurance program, and so we usually carry a contingency so that we don't have a problem at year end. Our unemployment was pretty much right on. We were just slightly under there, and that's basically the highlights of that area.
Is that good, Kathy? Yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 3. We have Dr. Jay Lang, Superintendent of Schools, to discuss the fiscal year 16 school department budgets and fiscal year 16 special ed costs. Dr. Lang?
Thank you.
Good evening.
Very nice to see you here tonight, my first tri-board meeting.
Yes. Welcome.
Excuse me? Hold the mic up.
Oh, just a little bit.
Thank you. Nice to see you again tonight. A couple quick updates for you. No presentation. I'm just going to speak to this. At the last school committee meeting, the school committee did approve the fiscal 16 line item budget, line item $54.2 million. So that is the budget we're going to be tracking for the school system over the coming year. As an aside, fiscal 15 close we thought went very well. In particular, wanted to thank the town side for working well with Michelle Crester, our new business administrator. We're very happy to have her on board, and we think the fiscal 15 close went very well. Looking forward to 16 and actually having the Munis Systems join and be able to look at reporting in a different fashion going forward, but 16 seems to be going well. In the school department, as you know, most of the expenses are salary expenses, so the summer is a quiet time. You don't have a lot of expenses hitting the budget in July and August. So we actually just ran our second payroll last week. At the end of September, we'll perform our first fiscal quarter report for the school committee, and then we'll report that out to them at the second meeting in October. So it's very difficult to track and trend or do projections on salaries for the year, only having 2 payroll periods completed at this point. But we will have that report done at the end of September. It'll be reported to the school committee the second meeting in October, and certainly that report will be posted on the website and made available to the FinCom as well as Board of Selectmen or any community members that are interested. When we looked at the personnel line items in the budget, the one that did kind of catch our attention early on in the year is the out-of-district special education tuition costs, which were reported originally to the Finance Subcommittee of the School Committee, then the full School Committee, and then we did talk about it at FinCom last Thursday night. And it appears to just be a budgeting issue. Twofold. There are 2 factors involved. Over the course of the summer, we did have 2 students move into Chelmsford from other communities. So those 2 students were not included in our head counts or in our budget projections. They were in out-of-district placements, so Chelmsford now becomes fiscally responsible for continuing the services to those two students. And the total cost of those 2 students coming in is a little over $200,000. In addition to that, we were able to actually bring 4 students back into Chelmsford that were in out-of-district placements last year. We always look to do that when we can. If we can provide a program that's equal to or better than the program they'd be receiving in their out-of-district placement, we look to bring them back into the district, and that did happen for 4 students, so that was a positive. At some point over the course of the spring and summer, it was determined that 8 of our current students, or students who attended school in Chelmsford last year, required out-of-district placements. And unfortunately, the cost for those students' tuitions were not incorporated into the fiscal 16 budget. So the total cost of those 8 students adds up to $294,000. So when you look at the cumulative effect of the 2 new students coming in from out of town, which really weren't anticipated and is very difficult to budget for, and the 8 students who were in district, those 10 students have a cumulative total of $494,000, a little less than $500,000 in the fiscal 16 budget that was not budgeted for. We did proof that, and it kind of came to light when we were issuing the purchase orders this year for the tuitions for the 98 students that are in out-of-district placements, and that's when we realized the actual budget amount was not going to be sufficient to meet the needs of the out-of-district tuition costs. So that happened. When we had the school committee's finance subcommittee, we reported a little bit about the structures that are in place to actually track students in district who potentially could go out of district. We've been working with Carol Fredette, who's come back for the year as our interim special education director of student services. And there are 5 additional students that we're actually kind of watching at this point in time that are potentially, and we kind of classify them as, potential exposure to go out at some point over the course of the year. They're in various stages of kind of hearings and IEP review processes. So those 5 additional children at this point in time would add up to, again, based on our best case guess of what type of a placement they would go to, is approximately $283,000. So we know at this point that our out-of-district tuition account is basically in the red, or it's going to be over budget by $500,000, and there's another potential 283 out there. It may all come to light. None of it may come to light. We don't know, but we wanted to classify for the school committee what the potential exposure was. And we'll be producing for them a bi-monthly report that actually tracks students coming in and out of the program so that they're aware of changes and the students that are in flux as we're doing our reviews. The school committee, one of the things I did present to them, has on account a little under $600,000 in the circuit breaker reimbursement account. And that account is primarily used for the situations like the 2 students that moved in from another district that you really wouldn't have accounted for in the budget. So that's a perfect use for those funds. You utilize circuit breaker for a year, you cover your either tuition or transportation costs, and then you build those students into your base budget for the following year. So we do have $600,000 in circuit breaker at this point of the year. That certainly can go to count towards the 494, the slightly under $500,000 that we know we're in the hole already for, but that really doesn't leave us any flexibility over the course of the year. And there is that other potential 283 that's hanging out there. So that is an issue that, and I think that's the one non-personnel issue that concerned us when we were doing the first pass at the budget. Wanted to bring that to the school committee, subcommittee attention, obviously the school committee, and then we did discuss it with FinCom and you here as well tonight. And we'll have a much better idea on the personnel side of the budget at the end of September when we do the first quarter review.
Great, Dr. Lang, thank you. Any questions for Dr. Lang?
These 5 additional potential kids?
Correct.
That are in the process. Are you able to classify these into what's the chance of them going out of district? Like 50-50, 75 plus, anything like that to give us a better idea?
Yeah, I am still trying to get up to speed on all the individual cases for the students, and some of them are very involved. So some students are in, 2 of them, I believe, at this point are in what's called the hearing phase. So they've gone through the IEP process. Basically, the family and the district are at odds over the best placement for the child. So they've now gone to mediation with the state, and the state will actually make the determination of where the best placement for the district is. If it's in the district, the child would stay here and there'd be no cost. If the state finds that the best placement is an out-of-district placement, then the child would be placed out-of-district, and then we would be asked to assume the cost of that. So those 2 are very, kind of volatile at this point, I guess I would classify them as. The other 3, I believe, are more students who are currently in our existing programs. There's a question about whether it's the proper fit for the student or not. So those 3 are, again, if you had to classify them, the first 2 are probably the odds are better that there's some potential cost there. The other 3, I don't know how I'd classify at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't know if you've seen this, but Darlene Lucy, our accountant, provided us with a listing of what the incident last year, let's call it an incident, cost us as a whole. And one of the things I'm concerned about is that the former superintendent basically cashed out with $136,000 and some change. And it says next to it, funding source, budget reductions. What did we have to cut to pay this? Or is that not accurate?
Well, I'm going to guess. We haven't cut anything to this point in time. You would fund that either through a budget reduction or the school committee having available funds, say a school choice fund or another funding mechanism to be able to provide for that cost. we would have a better handle also at the end of, say, the first quarter when we do our personnel projection. If there were a surplus, let's say we're going to have an extra $50,000 cumulatively in salaries in the district, that could go to offset that. We have not talked as a group about making any budget reduction to be able to cover that cost. So I don't know.
Okay, why is
Hold
so?
on, I think Mike.
Can I address it? In a technical sense, there has been, it would be incorrect to call it a budget reduction, just because the budget that was voted at last year's town meeting has not been adjusted to take those costs out of another line, right? The settlement came in June. The budget was originally voted back in April. So the idea, of course, is that money is fungible, to use a phrase, and it is a lost opportunity in a sense. The intent at the time was looking at the school choice number, and the intent was that money would provide the reserve to cover the separation costs with the superintendent. So that there wouldn't be any reduction in services given to the kids. But again, there's the opportunity cost of using that money, which is otherwise unrestricted, to cover an expense like that.
I assume it's already been paid by the town.
Being paid.
So
I don't think
Being
I don't
paid
think that's
bi-weekly.
correct. Yeah.
Being
being
paid
paid
through
weekly, bi-weekly?
Weekly,
Okay.
payroll.
So they must have to take it out of a particular line, I would think. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
But to
So-
clarify the point, are you basically saying the intent is to fund it within the budget, though, and not ask for additional funding? Is that sort of the intent of that?
Well, I think.
Or
Oh
to
yeah,
go-
no. I mean, we're far past that, right? We would have asked for it at the time if that had been the intent.
Why-
We did not, and yeah, we're gonna
You're in a
live within our
situation,
means.
you're gonna be in a situation where you're gonna have to ask for money. So is that part of the money you're gonna have to ask for because you?
No.
Because
Well,
you don't have,
Again,
because you don't have the circuit breaker money.
Right.
to
Money.
use on programs and things like that, then is that gonna get paid out of circuit breaker?
Well,
Paid out of circuit-
again,
it can't
money's
be paid
money's
from circuit
fungible,
breaker.
right? And we've lost some
It's what?
fungible. It flows. It goes wherever. There's no difference between dollar A and dollar B.
Yeah, the
So-
school department thinks that way, not the rest of the world.
Guys,
No,
Bob,
that's actually
actually,
a
Mike, if I
pretty-
could, and Bob, if I could, I think they've
accurate
answered the question that they have the money or they intend to fund it within their budget, and I think that answers the
I
question,
don't think
so.
they did say that.
Yes, they did.
Yes,
I agree, I think that they
we
did,
did.
so.
The
I'm gonna ask you to move on.
question of having 10 new out-of-district placements is I think, a different one. I mean, the 2 that came in from out of town clearly could not have been foreseen. I think you
Right.
can argue about whether or not
Right.
we should have seen the 8 that were in district.
But that
and
could be
and do
funded.
some accounting for that. To tell you the truth, I'm a little fuzzy on how you account for that. It's kind of the situation we have with these 5 kids now. If we have 5 kids who could potentially become out-of-district placements, should we make cuts to our existing budget to move money out right now to cover the full possibility that they might move out?
No, but you have your
it's
your
difficult.
circuit breaker money, and if
That's
if
the
down the
intent for
road
the
you're gonna
circuit
use
breaker.
that to pay this, then I have a problem with it.
For
We
the,
already explained to you,
Yeah.
we're using
They're
the
not.
circuit breaker. We already answered the question.
I thought he said he was
No,
gonna
he
use
did
it.
not say he was using the circuit breaker, Bob.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're sweeping it under the
No,
rug.
we're not sweeping under the rug. We've been very
we're
transparent.
talking about it at tri-board.
Well, yeah, only
We're
because
doing
I
a
brought it
lousy
up.
job.
If I could,
sweeping it under
I
the
think the
rug.
question has been answered, so do you have any other questions, Bob, or anyone else this evening?
Yeah, I have another question. It's my understanding that upon leaving the building, the former superintendent gave IT workers a $5,000 raise each. Is that true?
Yes, there were 4 workers within the IT department that were each given a salary adjustment of an additional $5,000. 4 people in total, not the whole IT department.
No, I understand.
And there was an existing position within the department that was not funded or not filled. And instead of filling that position, they opted to basically take a reduction in the total amount of the budget for that line and disperse it among 4 people.
So in essence, we didn't save anything because we weren't going to fill that position, but then we took $20,000 and applied it against existing workers.
No, I believe in essence there actually is a slight savings in the budget because we would have budgeted more than $20,000 for the line item. I'm not sure the exact
did
dollar amount. Was it 40 or?
This is roughly 45,000.
There was about $45,000 that was budgeted for a position.
Right.
Of which they're using $20,000 to supplement the salary of 4 people. So that will actually create about a $25,000 savings
Right.
in the budget line.
And they assume the workload of that person.
Yes, they're not backfilling that person.
Yeah, but that's not a reason for it, because in the
Well,
real
you save the
world,
benefits too.
in the real, granted, I'll accept that, but in the real world, if there's a cut in a budget, people just absorb the work. I come from an IT background, and that's what happened in the company I worked for, okay?
I think that's kind of a universal statement, Bob. I mean, I think you're starting to micromanage their budget at this point.
I'm not micromanaging. It's just that I don't believe this school committee has the best interest of the town.
Well, you're
When they
wrong, Bob.
give-
You're
when-
wrong.
Excuse me,
No, no,
excuse me,
I'm not
excuse
gonna-
me, I have the field, I have the
Yeah.
floor,
Not
okay?
to tell us the school committee doesn't have the best interest. Of course they do. Why would
You
you
give
say that?
136,000 as a gift
Bob.
going out the door, and then you.
Is this where we're going, Mr. Chairman?
No, but
No, but it's gotta be brought up.
It's
If-
not a gift.
if you want me to just-
First of all, the vacation and the sick time is owed by contract. That's not part of that's not part of the separation agreement. That's because he left.
Right.
That's not a gift.
But they're
That's
not getting a job.
contractually owed.
But paying
No,
them extra
I
months for
honestly,
not
I don't
getting
want
a
you guys to
job.
have to continue to argue with him because it's just going to keep him going. So I'd appreciate,
him going.
Bob, you asked your questions. I think they've been answered.
Well, I think,
So.
I think when we go to town meeting, people have to look at things like this.
All right, I know.
136,000, 50,
Right.
5,000 each for 4 people. If you're going to eliminate a position, you eliminate it, and you recover that money. You don't divvy it up among the group.
I think it should be noted that we had nothing to do with that.
No, the outgoing superintendent did it.
Right.
We
I'd like to focus on what's on the
Oh,
agenda tonight, which is
Don't
fiscal
say
year
that the school
16.
committee doesn't have
But the school
the
committee has
interest.
control over him.
No,
They
we
should-
don't.
How did we have control over him, Bob?
You have control over the superintendent.
As he's got a pen in his hand and there's 5 minutes
Honestly,
left on the
I know
clock.
you guys want to argue with him, but you will be here all night. It won't end. I think the most appropriate time for this, Bob, is at town meeting. I feel confident that you're going to get up and express these opinions, and I feel like that's the appropriate time.
This is part of the reason that school committee doesn't have credibility, because of things like this. I'm sorry.
Bob, we're talking about the budget right
And
now,
to
not their
shut me off is
credibility.
not the right thing to do. I want answers to those questions.
What
I
was
wanna
the
know where
question?
money's coming
If
from.
I could, honestly,
Yeah, okay.
I believe the answer to the question is those are things the last superintendent did, and now the new superintendent and business manager are doing their best to manage the budget moving forward. They answered your questions about what happened last year with the budget. Unless you have any new questions about the budget moving forward, I'm going to ask if anyone else has questions this evening. All right.
Nobody's gutsy enough to ask the questions. That's the problem.
Save it for town meeting, Bob. I'm going to ask Paul Cohen to move on
These
now.
tri-board questions meetings I've come to for 2 years, and nobody asks questions. Okay?
You do.
That's right,
Appreciate it.
and I will.
No, that's.
Did you want to fire him, Bob, or did you want to keep him?
Who?
The former superintendent?
I think we're.
I don't know, what did you
We're
want?
getting off
I
track.
never figured out what you wanted.
Yeah,
You don't want to answer the question?
if we could.
Well, I didn't. I'm sorry. I never did figure it out.
I think we should move on to the fiscal year 17 revenue expenditures. That's the next item on the agenda. So if I could I'm going to hand
I
the
want to
microphone.
answer his question.
I'm sorry, now's not the appropriate time, and I'm
He asked
managing
me
the
a
meeting
question.
tonight. Yeah, he's not chairing the meeting, so with all due respect, Bob, I'm
Okay.
handing the microphone over to the town manager to move on.
Paul looks like he's gonna
Thank you,
throw
Mr.
up.
Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I'll be back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very welcome.
As we're here in the third week of September, we're sort of at a transition point. We're obviously preparing to go to town meeting next month for finalizing the current year's budget in terms of, some adjustments. And also, as you know, because we'll be submitting our tax rate for approval in late November with a classification hearing before the Board of Selectmen, and then ultimately submittal to the Department of Revenue. So that's sort of we're sort of bringing to an end the considerations and funding in terms of the tax levy for 16 that we're in now, but also we're at a sort of departure point for the fiscal year 17 budget. As is customary this time of the year, the October 1st is our start point for that process. This tri-board meeting really is the initiation of the budget process for fiscal year 17, with the discussion amongst the school committee, board of selectmen, input from the finance committee going forward. And that's really what I intend to do this evening, and also have some discussion points in terms of how we can best manage this going forward, because the point that I think was made earlier by the chair of the school committee, and it's a concern I'm sure of Dr. Lane and myself, is, going forward, particularly on something like special education, remember how the process works. Under the town charter, I have to submit a balanced budget to the finance committee, board of selectmen, and ultimately the school committee, because their budget's in there by the end of January. Okay? And then that basically follows very quickly, as you know, upon the governor's submittal of the state budget. And then as you know, in terms of budgetary process, FinCom holds its hearings, and then really beginning of March is when the school committee will go in before the finance committee, usually because we put them at the end, so that we have ample time. But then they've got to get their book to press in April, beginning of April, so the book's ready for the town meeting the fourth week of April. Why that's relevant is when you're thinking about the special ed situation, exactly. I mean, obviously, we know going forward, and I'm confident of it, that Dr. Lang and Michelle Cresta are going to put their best information that we have. But in essence, think about this process, and it's a backdrop for this whole discussion. We're going to make that decision because I've got to give a number out in January to the school committee, and again, in the process. So the problem's going to be is you're going to have 6 months of that year where you're going to have these variances in special education, as well as the summer, and then the 12 months, fiscal year that goes from there. And it's a question of how do we budget for that, and then question of how do we afford to budget for that. And also, I'm still waiting for the year when the kids move out in the summer. Can't a couple of our special education kids move somewhere? I've been here 9 years, and I've always heard these kids moving in over the summer. But some year someone's going to move out. They're going to find some lovely home in Montana and say, we're going to go there and see the mountains and have a great program. But seriously, though, it really is a serious problem, and it really because again, the special education thing is nobody's fault in the sense of it's services that are deemed necessary for the children, and whether that child is a child in Chelmsford or a child in another community, the state's going to make that decision if it's a contested one, no matter where they are. They're not going to make the decision, because that student lives in Chelmsford, we're going to decide X versus Y, and most of them are no-brainers. I mean, let's be honest. Some of these special ed cases aren't, discretionary. They're quite obvious, and that really is the challenge for us as a community going forward, funding-wise, in terms of how we meet these needs. And so I just wanted to give that as a background because, really, I think that's what's resting in the back of our minds. I know it's in the back of my mind as I'm trying to look towards preparing a budget that we can constrain within the limits of Proposition 2.5 and our funding availability, while also not jeopardizing other town services. Because you're right. I mean, you don't want to be sitting here next year and saying, we're $600,000 in surplus in special education, and gee, I guess it's too bad that we didn't add that fifth grade teacher in the co-classrooms. I mean, remember those difficult discussions. That's what this is about. And I saw this committee, make those decisions in the springtime. So again, I just want you to bear in mind the difficulty as well as the challenge that's before us. So coming back to the specifics, right now, as Darlene said, our books are closed for 15. The auditors have been in. Her balance sheet is submitted to the Department of Revenue. Last week, they issued their certification of our free cash. It's on the screen. It's on the handouts in front of you. Our free cash this past year was $2.2 million. Our stabilization fund balance is $8.2 million. Our sewer enterprise fund, which again is a separate entity for the sewer operation, is $900,000, and our golf course enterprise is just under $30,000. Now, what I want to do is in this meeting, I want to give you a little bit of history, and then we're going to look going forward because I think it's helpful. Because I think sometimes when you just look at numbers, you don't get a sense of context of where they are. You look at history on slide 18, a free cash history. We give you I provided for you the free cash all the way back for 15 fiscal years, back to fiscal year 01. And some people see numbers, others like to see charts, so I provide them in both. But as you can see, a number of around $2 million, would be not unheard of 15 years ago. As you saw, we dipped in the difficult period of the recession back in 2007, and then we've come back up. But probably the most item that interests me the most is the right-hand column where it says free cash as a percentage of the budget. You just can't look at, oh, it's $2 million, because $2 million isn't the same in 15 as it was in 2001. So again, right now our free cash is this year was around 2% of our budget, and that's just something to bear in mind because we talk about these exposures. And so I presented it on 19 in a graphical form with the amount of free cash, and then on 20 it's a chart of the percentage of the town's budget. And as you can see, we're actually running probably, if you look at it graphically over a 15-year period, we're probably in more of a mean period right now of around the 2%. As you saw at the beginning part of the century, we're up around 2.5%. We really hit our lows between the 2007, and then you can see we hit another low in 2011, then it spiked up in 12, and then it's sort of back down to normal. So again, I think reasonably looking at it, $2 million sounds like a lot of money. What we're cautious of, and we always ask Darlene to report, is, well, where did this money come from? Because as I presented in the last budget, yes, we expect we'll always generate some free cash. It's natural that we're never gonna hit the mark right on the revenues when we're predicting a period that's gonna start 9 months out and run 21 months out. We're also gonna have some turn back from departments. And quite frankly, yes, we do budget a little bit conservatively because I'd rather be sitting here explaining the free cash of $2 million rather than being here in fiscal '04 when they had a negative free cash number, because that would certainly generate more headlines than the positive free cash number. Similar analysis on slide 21 with the stabilization fund. Again, we give you the gross numbers in terms of what is the dollar amount in the fund. We compare that to the town's budget. Obviously, if you go back to the beginning of this century, the town was running a $75 million budget. We're now running a $125 million budget in fiscal year 16. So obviously, your stabilization fund balance might be similar, but obviously as a percentage of the budget, it's less now than it was at the beginning of the decade. And obviously, as we all know, we don't need to revisit it, we hit our low back in 2007, 2008 when we lost our bond rating, and the recessionary actions and so forth. And that's why, we've been conscious in terms of getting the fund back up between our town policies between 5% and 10%. We sort of strive for the midpoint of that of 7.5%. And so that sort of explains where we are, even though it's an important place to be because, again, if you hit a period, you also would think about, well, as an operating entity, it's look at, well, what is 1 or 2 months of operations versus your cash holding. So again, we're at a good place. And again, 22 just shows it as a percentage of the budget, and for those who see things better in a graphical form as opposed to numerical form. On to 23, again, briefly go through this. We've seen this in the budget season. Obviously, where does our money go? Again, we're a service organization, and our biggest service is education. In terms of the departmental line items, the biggest amount obviously goes towards the schools, including the Neshoba Tech. And then our next biggest expense is benefits and insurance. And then beyond that is debt service. And then the remaining 26% are basically general government operations from public works, police and fire, which constitute our public safety, and then general government operations, including the library. I also like to look at trends over years. On slide 24, you see that our budget has increased by 18% during the past 5 fiscal years. And roughly, you see the funding for the schools has gone up relatively proportioned to the overall budget of the town. Where you see the big spike, and we know about this, has been our enrollment at Neshoba Tech. That's gone up 52% in the last 5 years, or almost $1 million. Everything else is sort of within that, expected, range of the norm. On slide 25, which is probably the most notable thing, is how is our budget funded? Let's always be mindful of the fact we're raising $90 million a year in property tax. Roughly 3 out of every $4 that we spend in this community comes from the property tax. State aid is 13.5% or $16 million. Local receipts 7.5%, and other available funds $4 million or 3.4%. Again, you look on slide 26, you see that trend over 5 years, and obviously what's growing, and we see it, is the property tax. It's up 18% over a 5-year period. Basically what that is your 2.5% compounded growth plus some new growth. Your state aid is up 8.4% or 1.3 million over 5 years, not a great level of increase in state aid, as you can imagine, if you compound over 5 years to get to 8.4%. And so forth. The other one to mindful, again, is that we're not, our situation in Chelmsford it mirrors that or is very similar to that of what happens across the Commonwealth. When we look at the average single-family property tax bill, 1 would be the highest bill in the Commonwealth, 351 would be the lowest. As you can see, we're 69 for this current year at a average single-family tax bill of 6329. You can see we've been around the 70 mark, going back now for, half dozen or so years. And if you went back over a decade ago, we were higher at 63rd. So basically taxes are rising in Chelmsford, but they're rising everywhere across the Commonwealth. And then on slide 28, I try to provide you with some regional comparison of property tax, average single-family property tax bill increase, because that's the metric that we have on the state database websites. And again, whether you want to look at a 5-year period, a 10-year period, a 15-year period, Chelmsford is up. But again, we're sort of in the middle amongst the surrounding communities of Billerica, Dracut, Littleton, Tewksbury, Tingsboro, and Westford. Looking onto its state aid on slide 29, looking over 5 years, again, a 5-year period, our Chapter 70 education is up 6.5% in 5 years. Not very good. Our unrestricted general government aid is up by 9%, and most of that was in this past year with the new governor's allocation formula. However, the most notable thing is when you look on slide 30 of what happened in 15 years. If you take our net state aid, which is basically the amount the state provides us in receipts as well as the state assessments, we actually have less state aid net in this community of $14 million than we had 15 years ago in fiscal year '01. So in essence, we're carrying the boat for ourselves. And then I will go on in the next couple of slides, and this all comes back to the long heralded Chapter 70 issue. On slide 31, I think the interesting thing to note there is really the comparisons on these similar communities, but I think the one that really strikes out at me is the Chelmsford versus Westford comparison. Using the state's data, the town of Westford has a higher per capita income of over $10,000. They're 51,165 versus 41,557. They also have a higher value per capita of property of 176 versus 136, and yet they receive $6 million more in Chapter 70 aid than the town of Chelmsford for very similar enrollments. Even in a community like Franklin, it's even more stark, and we've always known this for the years we've sat here at this table. Again, Franklin very similar in terms of their income per capita and equalized property value per capita, but yet they get $27 million in Chapter 70 aid. And have 20% more students, and obviously what the message of all this is the state's education formula, which was really last reset in 1993 and was slightly tinkered with a half dozen years ago, rewards growth communities. However, you can see it has a disparate effect on communities like Chelmsford that were built out, and so in essence, we're sort of the middle class community where you don't get the state aid. And you're certainly not going to get the aid that you would give towards a gateway city and so forth, but yet you're not a community that's passing overrides as well, so you're sort of stuck in that tough middle. In terms of funding of our schools, as I've noted, it's been funding relative to our increase. However, if you look at what the state says is our required school spending, you can see that we've exceeded that, and obviously that's what we should be doing. But it just goes to show you how the state's formula is off, and some point, perhaps the state will address this issue of required school spending and the whole Chapter 70 formula. But you can see if you went back to the beginning of this decade, our net school spending over the required was only 8%. Now we're almost 20% above that, and I'm sure we'll even be higher this year once the numbers finally get submitted and come out. But basically, we're only required to fund less than $50 million in net school spending. We're well over that when you consider not only the schools line item, but also the benefits and other items that come in from the schools, from the general government side, including facilities. So the bottom line is we still have a case to be made regarding how the state is supporting education across the Commonwealth amongst communities. On 33, again, this is data you've seen from the previous year's budget. We can clearly see that in Chelmsford we have an enrollment reduction, and what that has resulted in has been a decrease, which is a good thing, of the student-teacher ratio. to the point where, again, we were over 15 and a half back in '08. We're down now to 14.8. You can see that that's dropping. We'll see what this year's numbers come in when they're completed and submitted by the state. It just, again, that becomes a trade-off. And this is the choices. And I think that's what the struggle I think the school committee and the community is going to have is, how do you meet and maintain within a budget? Is it, if you've got special ed and other fixed costs, is it going to affect other components of the education system, notably class size? So that's an issue. Again, on slide 34, I put information on per pupil expenditure because I assume that people watching the meeting, not necessarily those in the room, don't follow us closely and don't retain all the numbers. So that's why I often bring these back. But it's helpful to note that obviously we're spending clearly in 15 and certainly this year we're spending over $12,500 a student in a classroom. I don't know that people often grasp that to have a child in the school system, it's $12,500, and so you put a classroom of 20 people there. You've got a teacher there that has a lot of responsibility in a sense for a community, and it's important to note the cost of education, and clearly it has increased in 5 years, and it's clearly going to increase, and it's certainly not comparing to what it's costing somebody to send a student to private college, but it's notable to note that do $12,500 a student, and then figure out what we're investing in a child, and that's what we're doing here in the community over their tenure in the school system. If they're going, K through 12, or just use grades 1 through 12, and it's over $12,000 a year, obviously we're making a considerable investment in the students, and that's obviously the primary value and purpose of what we do as a local community. On page 35, again, we use some comparative data of per pupil expenditures, with the most recent data from the DOER DESI website. Again, Chelmsford in the middle. We, in terms of what we're spending per pupil with the communities that are near us or compared to us by the state metric. Again, I touched earlier the fact that our enrollment at Neshoba Tech has increased by a third over the last 5 years. We now have 185 students. We often see the Neshoba Tech costs and so forth. And again, on October 1st of this year, there'll be the annual school census. Sometime after that period, we'll get reports on what the enrollments are in Chelmsford, what the enrollments are at Neshoba Tech. And again, that will get us a little bit of insight in terms of how the state will reallocate our Chapter 70 funding for a community. And obviously, with the trend, some of our Chapter 70 money has gone over towards Neshoba. On 37, this is a slide I think is helpful because I think sometimes people think that we're just adding people left and right or whatever at the in government. We have the same number of general government employees in fiscal year 16 to 240 that we had back in fiscal year 2008. The other thing to note on slide 38 is the inflationary measures. When you look at these numbers over time, the good news is we're in a period of low inflation. And why that's a good news is Proposition 2.5 is 2.5 regardless of what the inflation rate is. So the fact that we're in a period of low inflation where it's less than 2% per year is actually helping us to sustain ourselves going forward because you can imagine, and we've been in periods where it's been the opposite, when you're still at your 2.5 limit, but your inflation's at 3.5%, and so forth. So that is mindful in terms of how we operate. So now really getting to the point of tonight and going into the forecast for 17, I offer this for your consideration at this point. And again, I point out that we're forecasting for a period that will begin in 12 months from now and will end in 22 months from now. Okay, so it's easy to sit here when Darlene gives numbers for the fiscal year that closes and said, well, you should have estimated a little higher on the motor vehicle excise, and gee, why didn't you get those permits right? Well, again, if you went back in time 22 months ago, could you make those predictions? And what would those predictions have been? Because what we've seen in this post-recessionary economy, and we're still seeing it in the world economy, and there's still obviously some great uncertainty going forward, is it's been a bumpy recovery. And in fact, that's been the whole concern in terms of it's really been unprecedented. And it's obviously you see the uncertainty in the stock market as well because of the question of of when will a bear market come back, because by now we should have had a bear market, and maybe we are experiencing that now. So again, I bear in mind that we're sitting here, we're gonna forecast expenses and revenues for a period that's going to begin next July 1 and go through June 30th, 2017. So with that, we have to do it, so we're going to do it. And again, our goal is to preserve the quality of local government services. And again, the challenges are meeting our fixed costs from labor contracts, retirement system assessments, health insurance premiums, our vocational technical school assessment, and our debt service. The first one and biggest one is our employee pay schedules. Again, we're a service industry. We employ people to provide services, public safety, education, veterans, library, and so forth. Our biggest one is our payroll. And at this point, all of our collective bargaining agreements expire at the end of this fiscal year, as well as noting in the fact, as an asterisk, we still have 2 police contracts that expired 3 years ago that haven't been resolved. But we need to look forward in terms of the funding for those contracts going into the fiscal year 17, where right now there's no contracts in place. Now, under our bylaws, we are prohibited from funding a general government contract settlement in advance of its settlement. So I can't put money in the police budget or the fire budget or the town administrator's budget for contracts that aren't resolved. The schools don't have that constraint. They don't have to bring their agreements to town meeting. So generally what we do is we provide that money for the school system in the budget, and then they kind of have to hold off to it because they don't know if they're going to settle and when they're going to settle. So it's a challenge for them as well in terms of practically, in terms of their budget allocation. And as we know, and this was the exception, traditionally the Chelmsford agreements, particularly in the school side, have gone multi-year without a settlement. I think this was the exception and the rule. And let's hope it's a new trend, but the bottom line is it's something we have to bear in mind. So again, not knowing what that is, but again, I have to put some plug number because we also have to fund, when the contracts aren't agreed to, the old contracts remain in place, which means you still have to provide the step increases for those people who are under those labor agreements. That costs money. We have to factor that in. And also the town has to deal with its non-union employees. So I've used a round number of $1.4 million across the community towards that end. The next item is health insurance. Right now we're spending $10.5 million in health insurance. We are providing an aggressive form of health insurance, meaning we're at the benchmark. We are mirroring the Massachusetts Group Insurance Commission, which provides the benefits for state employees as well as cities and towns that are in there. Those benefit changes, we're mirroring those as we'll now enter the third year of our 3-year agreement. So this past year, we had our benefits were decreased, meaning the employees were subject to higher co-payments, higher deductibles, and also they got a 8.9% rate increase. Now the town bears, and for active employees, 75% of that. The employee bears 25%, and then retirees, it's closer to 60-40. The best information that I have at this time is that the rate increase for fiscal year 17 is likely to mirror that of 16. And there are all things that you're reading about in the mail. High cost of prescription drugs, the whole issue of utilization, the fact that we're in an area that people utilize the medical teaching hospitals in Boston and so forth. So the best information that I have to date is that we're looking at a 9% or so increase. If you take the same increase we had this year and roll it forward, that's a $930,000 impact to the budget. Okay, and then again, you have this unknown of retirees, because what's happening over time is, our employee base is staying constant, but our number of retirees are growing. And we've seen that happen over time. We now actually have more retiree contracts because retirees and their spouses are a separate contract, and obviously family people is one contract for an active employee, but we have more retiree contracts than we do have active employee contracts. And one of the challenges, going to your question earlier, Kathy, the federal Medicare supplement plans, those rates are based on a calendar year. So we're budgeting for something that really won't become effective until a year later when we'll know the rate increase. So we will know by March the rate increases for July 1 for the active employees and so forth. But for those who are on Medicare supplement plans and so forth, we sort of have 6 months of known, but then we don't know what the rate's going to be, and so that also can skew your number in terms of the course of the year. So bottom line is, salary costs, health insurance, big number. The next item we have is our county retirement assessment. Good news on this in the fact that we know this number for next year because the retirement system does a 2-year assessment in their system. They evaluate their liabilities every 2 years. We're now coming into the second year. So the good news is we know the number. The bad news is the number's not good. It's a $456,000 increase. An increase of 6.4% to $7.55 million is a check that we're going to cut to Middlesex County Retirement next July. And the reason we cut it in July is because they actually give you a payment discount for prepaying it early, and that's the number we use in our budget. But the bottom line is, again, it's another quote-unquote fixed cost for the town based on the retirement system's operations under the state laws, which require them to fully fund their unfunded liability, which is on schedule to be paid out in Middlesex County by 2035. So we're still 20 years away from that, so that's something that's known as we go in. The next number is in Neshoba Tech on slide 45. As I mentioned earlier, there'll be a census on October 1st that will derive the assessments ratios for going forward. I don't know who's in the classrooms today, and we'll know in a few weeks. At this point, the best I can assume is that the increase will probably be the same as it was this past year. That it could be another $250,000, and we'll have to see, because again, part of it depends upon the enrollment trends, not only in Chelmsford but the other towns. But we'll just have to wait and see what those numbers are. So at this point, I'm using $250,000 for our increase, which again was identical for last year. Again, we'll know more over time. The next item is new, although it's been on the horizon and is waving at us real fast. And this is I guess I'd call it, probably the best word would be an unfunded mandate from the federal government. And those of you who saw the MMA publication this month, they basically spent the month on the editorial on this, trying to ring the bell. We've been reviewing, discussing, considering, and commenting on the EPA's stormwater management guidelines for over the past year. And the expectation is that they will issue their final regulations by the end of this calendar year. Basically by the end of December, in a couple of months, they're expected to issue their final regulations for Massachusetts. And why I say Massachusetts is they've already done this in other states. New Hampshire was earlier than we were in their process and so forth. We expect to see the impacts within a year, because what they say is once the regulations are issued, you then have 12 months to conform and then implement them. Now, I guess the good news is the fact that they do it on at the end of this calendar year means that the full impact to Chelmsford will be split over a 2 fiscal year period. At this point, based on what we've seen on the comments and issues that are out there, we expect that we'll have to do additional stormwater monitoring and testing. We'll have to do structural filtration improvements, additional street sweeping, catch basin cleaning, additional educational efforts, and perhaps even changing the question of maybe we don't even put sand down in the streets anymore. We may have to use more salt because you don't have to sweep the salt from the streets when it's done. It goes away, which again is a bit weird because now you're adding another component to the stormwater as opposed to sand and salt. You're adding straight salt. But the bottom line is, I think it's a reasonable number to expect that impact, even on a half fiscal year basis, would be $200,000. We are looking at this regionally. There is a stormwater collaborative out there. When we come and have to do the testing and other contractual issues, we expect that we'll work with our neighboring communities and contract for that service collectively. But we're still going to have to write checks. And again, we're still going to have to perform work. And at this point, there doesn't appear to be anything that's going to impede this from happening, despite the fact you think, gee, we're heading into an election cycle and so forth. Doesn't seem to matter. The expectation is that these regs are coming, And again, this one's a hard one to fight against because it's undoubtable, and you see it in the media, the improvements in the water quality in this region. Again, many of us grew up here. None of us would even think of doing swimming or other activities in the Merrimack River when we were kids, and we remember the colors of the canals in Lowell downtown when we were kids, and the Charles River and other situations. Clearly, those areas have improved. As you can see, they get different grades. From it was a grade 1, now it's a grade 3 or whatever. The bottom line is that's why the expectation is that the biggest polluter now towards our natural bodies of water is stormwater, and that's why we expect that these regulations will become effective and will stick. Next item on slide 47 is a non-excluded debt service. That's known. We've done our refinancing. We've got our debt out there. We don't have anything in the pipeline other than the traditional activities we have as a community. So we're budgeting an increase of $140,000 for the upcoming year. The other thing that happens in fiscal year 17 are the state elections. Remember, the fiscal year starts July 1. Next September, there'll be the state primary election, where you wean out the candidates for Congress and Senate and so forth, although I guess it's not a Senate year, but and such for the state elections. And then you have the general election in November, and then you have the town election in April. So we'll be running the full boat of 3 elections in one fiscal year, in fiscal year 17. This year, we've only got 2, because we've got the presidential primary coming in March, and then we got our town election in April. And some years you only have 1, which is when there's an odd number year and you don't have any presidential primaries and so forth. So bottom line is we know we've got to fund our elections at a cost of $50,000 additional to fund the increased elections. The other thing that's again another fixed cost we look at is our Medicare tax, which is basically on our payroll tax. We're seeing a $30,000 increase of that. We'll be paying over $800,000 in Medicare taxes, we believe, in 17. So when you come to page 50, you can see that there's roughly $3.9 million of the items that I just described, without going into wishes and wants and desires and needs and such of the town departments. When you then flip to page 51, you start saying, okay, well, what about on the revenue side? Again, our biggest revenue source is the property tax. The 2.5%, if you look to the far right column, that's a mathematical equation. We would get $2.13 million by increasing the levy by 2.5%. At this point, our new growth is forecast as 1.3%. If you look back to that column to the left, 1.4, 932, 1.3, 925. We think the 1.3 is safe because of the fact that it sort of lags permit activity, and Darlene described earlier our permit activity. Even though solar systems will not give you new growth, I mean, you're not going to get much taxable growth on electrical and building permits for solar, but you will get it just by the nature of reinvestment in the community. And for example, our new growth period will go for 17 will go through June 30th this year. We'll see. We talked to the assessors what's going on. Oh, well, Andiamo's will be opening at the Stop and Shop Plaza. There's a fit out there. That will be done by February. Okay, so we'll get that by June 30th. We know they'll be starting, or we believe they'll be starting the work up in Drum Hill on the auto fair. But you know what? That's not likely to be completed by June 30th, so there'll only be a partial growth, that type of activity. So we're always in communication with our assessors. So again, from the property tax, we could have $3.4 million in additional property tax levy. State aid, I don't see a lot here. My total estimated increase is $325,000. The 2 big things in state aid are obviously Chapter 70. I'm forecasting $10.6 million, or an increase of $25 per student, which is a whole whopping $125,000 additional. And the general government aid, I'm bumping that up by 3.6% because the governor has indicated that he will increase our general government aid in proportion to the increase in the state budget. So my guess is 3.6% is probably around perhaps where they'll be. The state doesn't do its revenue forecast till December. So again, looking at those 2 items, I'm seeing in the slight miscellaneous stuff, we're probably at 325 for additional state aid. Again, clearly there's no atmosphere by the governor to raise taxes or other revenues. There doesn't appear to be by the Speaker of the House either. The Senate President seems more likely, but yet it's not going to carry the way, particularly as they're going into an election cycle. So again, I think the 325 is a reasonable number. On the local receipts on slide 53, again, our big number there, which is more than half our local receipts, is our motor vehicle excise. I'm going with $4.6 million. On a couple slides after this, I'll show you why that's that basis. And so my estimated increase is I'm using $9 million for the number for the upcoming year. I think that's a solid number. It's also a round number. I'll be honest, it didn't come out to $9 million by magic. And also we're starting to see, if you look to the second to the last row, we're also accounting for the increase in our solar net metering for the electricity that's coming off of these school roofs and the DPW roof for the year ahead. And so again, to motor vehicle excise, which is the big one, if you look on slide 54, and this is what Darlene was speaking to earlier, we provide you with data going back to fiscal year 2000. And the middle column is the actual taxes commitment for motor vehicle for the year. And that's interesting, obviously, because, it's good to know the real number, but I think the interesting number is the right-hand column, which is the annual change. And obviously the ones in parentheses in red ink, for those of you who printed it in color, are the decreases. So you can see it isn't just a linear increase that's going to go off. In fact, if you look at 2006, we were almost the same motor vehicle excise that we had in 15 at $4.8 million. So what happens is you have a period where you can see the numbers. You'll increase from 2002, 2003 by 180,000 a year. Then it drops 200,000. Then it dropped 40,000. Then it went up 800,000. Then it dropped 600,000. Then it went up 150. Then it dropped 170. Then it dropped 260. Went up 226. Then it dropped 38. And then now we have 3 years of increases, which, as you can see there, it's unprecedented. So that's why when Darlene says, hey, I'm not so sure that number is going to go up again next year, and certainly if it does, it's not going to go up leaps and bounds, there's some basis to that. And if you look on the chart on 55, again, I sort of graphic to show it out, showing the wave of that it ebbs and flows. Clearly, it's a slight positive trend, but I don't think any of us are going to be comfortable sitting here saying, oh, push it over $5 million because, we can see where this is going. I remember automobiles, and we saw this during the recession and other periods, they're a good that one can put off, because of economic conditions. And so, it's a durable good, but yet there is some discretion towards it, and it's something we have to be mindful of as we're forecasting. So on slide 56, you see we add up the property tax increase, the projected increase in state aid, the projected increase in local receipts, and it's roughly $3.9 million, which shows you on slide 57, it's 3.9 versus 3.9. You can quibble about the numbers, in this number here, that number there, this expense there, but what we're trying to do is show you the macro picture. The bottom line is, and again, it's not an exciting line to be at. We're not talking bold new initiatives. No one's coming in here and unveiling X, Y, Z. We're not talking here, and it hasn't come up yet about full-day kindergarten or enhanced police on the streets or this or that or the other thing. We're just talking, if we're trying to maintain the accustomed level of services in this community, the challenges we have on the revenue side, as well as the challenges we have on the fixed cost side, noting the fact that we're running a labor organization that requires payroll, requires benefits, and requires pension, Medicare tax, and so forth. So that's it in a nutshell. And Mr. Chairman, I'll stop at this point and entertain any questions or discussion that members of the boards may have.
Sure, I do see one right away from Mr. Goer from the Finance Committee. Can I just ask that you speak into a microphone if we can get you on? Thank you. Yes.
Yes, going back to Chapter 70, I think that some of you might know that Mary France was a member of a board that met this past spring, I believe, probably even during the winter, addressing Chapter 70. She has said that she will be glad to come and address any one of these bodies with respect to what the conclusions were made in that particular meeting. Now, she may be probably one of the, I hate to say this, but she may be one of the foremost experts in Chapter 70 in the town. And it might be good for us to maybe learn a little bit from what transpired. give us a better understanding. Now, she didn't say that she expected anything to change, but nevertheless, they did meet on it, and we should take advantage of that particular opportunity.
Or maybe if all
So-
three bodies are interested, maybe at the next meeting, give her 5 or
Well,
10
maybe at
minutes.
the next, maybe the next tri-board, if we have a tri-board
Right.
meeting in the fall, maybe that'd be a good time to do it,
Sure.
with all the bodies together.
I think that's a very good idea.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Everyone's okay? Yeah. Thank you. Charlie, did you have a question? Questions for the town manager?
I have a couple.
Anyone else? No? All right, Bob.
Aren't we funny?
Sometimes.
Paul, these are just one-shot type deals. The Medicare went up 30,000. We didn't increase the number of employees, so how did it go up, just by rate?
No, it's your payroll goes up. It's based on your payroll.
Oh, based on your payroll.
And even something as, as like we're bringing in the substitutes, right? That means we're cutting checks, payroll checks for substitutes. So those are the little nuances that we've got to try to stay ahead of. But just the fact that people are going to get a step increase, well, that means their payroll tax is going to increase. So we've got to bear in mind that. So we obviously look at trends, and that's why we're seeing our payroll tax is going to go up.
All right, that makes sense. The stormwater management, did the legislature vote on that, or was that an edict?
No, it's not the legislature. This is federal. This is EPA.
Oh, it's federal.
This is the Environmental Protection Agency that is imposing these regulations.
Oh.
And in fact, the state has raised some objections to it because the state would prefer to retain some of its current. I mean, again, Massachusetts is a very proactive environmental state, as we know. There are volumes of comments on the regulations.
Yeah.
Even Massachusetts has opposed some of the proposed regulations, but at the end of the day, it's the federal government that's going to make these decisions. And as I said earlier, we've seen this trend. It's already happened in New Hampshire, and what it does is it really affects urbanized areas. I mean, there will be communities, even in Massachusetts, who aren't going to be infected because of the lack of density and issues, but it's going to affect communities like Chelmsford and Westford and Tewksbury and Lowell and so forth. So yeah, it's federal, not state.
Okay, so it's supposed to take effect in 17?
Yeah, we expect that the regulations will be issued by the end of this calendar year, and then they will become effective a year later. So it'll be 1/1/17, is the best of our knowledge.
Did we ask them what they did in the middle of the country?
What do you mean?
The EPA was the one that breached that river that got all the orange stuff. That's just a joke.
Okay.
There was some other.
I didn't have it.
Thanks for letting us know.
Well, anybody that watches any news would know that all those rivers out there are polluted because of the EPA. I prefer to see employee pay schedules as contracts. That's kind of a spin. When I first looked at that, I thought we were going to change them from once every 2 weeks to once every week or something like that. So I think that should be
It's a
stated.
schedule within the contract. The contract is a document. Within
Yeah.
within the contract are their pay plans or pay schedules.
Okay, well, it's contracts, the way I look at it. Okay, and there was, the funding for the different, yeah, let me just find it, I think it was 33.
Oh, that's contracts.
Yeah, the funding for the school department. Why is it that our enrollment has dropped by 500, but yet our recommended spending has gone up, even though we're not hitting it? I mean, we're going beyond it. But why is it that with a decrease in enrollment, we end up paying more money?
Well, it's some of the things we talked about earlier this evening. You've got special ed costs, you've got higher pay scales, you've got smaller class sizes. Those are the items that, again, they're running a labor organization.
Yeah,
their fixed costs are increasing for.
Also, the state inflates
Mike,
your...
if I could I just a little bit closer?
The state inflates your required spending by a
Municipal revenue growth.
municipal factor,
Yep.
right? That basically takes into account the growth in the town as well.
It's revenues, right?
I'm trying and failing to think of how that's connected to your actual enrollment, though.
It's not.
Right, so it goes up even if your enrollment goes down.
Correct.
which is
So
odd.
even though they have a better net worth than us, personally,
Who?
their personal income, is that judged?
Well, the one thing about the per capita income measure is that the state actually uses an aggregate income measure, which is one of the reasons that Westford does better than we do. Because if you look at the population overall, we're what 25-30% bigger than they are. So even though their per capita income is slightly higher, our aggregate income as a town is slightly higher. That would be, I think we've talked about it at this body before, that would be a change that would be worth pushing to our representatives. If there were going to be a change made to Chapter 70, to change the income part of the formula from aggregate to per capita makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
It's a hard thing to do.
It is because it becomes a zero-sum game.
That's right,
State level.
exactly. You only have one pot of money, and whoever gains, somebody loses. So that's really a tough fight to have. You know, the reason towns like Westford and some of the other towns have a higher Chapter 70 dollar value than we do is because we had our growth early on. So as a result of our growth early on, we received less. Now, they surpassed us, but the formula was never redone. So I'm sure we'll learn more about
Mary
this.
can fill us in.
Mary will fill us in, but it's very, very hard to change Chapter 70, and our legislators as body have told us that. But I do.
You have a question?
More of a statement. You know, Paul, we're one of the only communities in the Merrimack Valley without full-day kindergarten. That's something we would respectfully like you in this tri-board to understand and start talking about this uncomfortable conversation. You know, we were voted in Newsweek as one of the top 500 schools in the country. I think that's going to help when people move to our community because of the schools, and we can only make our schools better with full-day kindergarten. So we respectfully just want you to understand that that's something that we're going to hopefully want to talk about and ask the community to support us.
Sal, if I could on that point, I know over the past 2 to 3 years, the school department has worked out a few different plans using different funding sources. Of course, a lot of that has changed over the past year. Are you working on any plans on different ways to phase it in, or are you just in the discussions now as you're sort of maybe getting back on your feet with things? Can you tell us where you are on full-day kindergarten from that perspective, the planning stage?
Respectfully turn it to our chairman and our superintendent.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, from my perspective, I'm going through a process now of actually going through all the old reports and the old, and not only that old, just even up through last year, the different documents that have been put together on full-day kindergarten and some of the various funding strategies, I guess, to accomplish that. I will come out and tell you that we need full-day kindergarten in Chelmsford. I can tell you most districts are actually now moving toward full-day pre-K. Most have half-day preschool now and are actually moving towards full-day pre-kindergarten. So it is absolutely the direction we need to go in. It's quite honestly even beyond just the discussion. We have to really figure out how we're going to get there at this point. To be one of less than 10 communities in the state that still doesn't have full-day kindergarten at some point is just unacceptable, and I think we have to get there. I would hope over the course of the next month or two, as I work with the school committee, finalize some of those reports, have a better grasp on it when we're actually talking to the town manager about budgets for the upcoming year and different scenarios that we can look at. I think logistically, as a group, whatever year we're going to actually implement it in, we need to pretty much have a hard or at least a soft approval with going in a hard direction by around the first of the year. We would really need to commit to something like that December, January at the latest, so that people can plan and the district can make the necessary steps, even facility-wise, to get up to speed for something like that. I'm actually beginning tomorrow on my first two. I've obviously been around to all of the schools, but more in-depth kind of tours of the buildings to really start assessing space needs and logistics within the buildings. And that'll take place over the next 3 weeks. We'll have some teams that are actually out there doing that investigative work. So I'll report back to the committee probably in October at some point. But we would need to make some decisions before the first of the year if we were to actually implement.
Great, thank you.
The chair might want to speak as well.
I think the original question, if I understood it, was, have we come up with new plans? And I think short answer is no. Several years ago, I had gone out as part of the team that was, investigating full-day kindergarten, and we went to 3 districts. We did research on what the educational community feels about full-day kindergarten and so forth, and we really, felt we had momentum. And we were looking at school choice and some other funds, and then a host of other issues came along, and realistically, it's obvious we weren't able to go ahead. And you've heard, it is important, but we're also well aware of the financial implications. And our superintendent will be speaking more about this when he talks about comprehensive study that he's proposing. So right now we don't have plans. We have pieces of things. We know what some of the possibilities are in terms of facilities, because it was discussed with Gary Persichetti and others, a number of years ago. So we've been working on this a long time. We know a lot of things, but we have to come up with a new plan.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I think it's interesting to note, and we saw it in the last budget process for the state, the kindergarten grants were in jeopardy. And I think the message that came out of there was, hey, look, that train's leaving the station, and don't assume that those monies are going to be around forever. And I think part of it is because there are so fewer communities that are left. But my sense is if Chelmsford doesn't get in for this year, you're not going to get any state grants because it's not going to be there after this year. And not saying it's the right or the wrong thing. The other side of the coin, I think one of the reasons we're one of the fewer communities that doesn't have full-day kindergarten is because Chelmsford has chosen not to offer tuition full-day kindergarten. There are other communities that are in full-day kindergarten that have done a tuition basis. I'm not saying it's the right or the wrong thing, but let's just say what it is. That was another avenue that, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, that Chelmsford has chosen not to pursue. And there are bases for that. I mean, we're obviously offering preschool. It was noted earlier about preschool. We're offering preschool for tuition, and while we meet special ed needs, because that makes sense financially. But the reason we don't, and we're seeing the same discussions in Westford and other communities. So again, it's not a criticism of Chelmsford. It's just the reality of the situation that there are some other communities that do offer kindergarten, but it's not free. So before we say, well, what's wrong with Chelmsford? We're one of 10 that doesn't have it. It's because Chelmsford has consciously chosen not to have tuition kindergarten. And again, it's not a criticism. It's just a statement of reality.
I'd just like to add a comment. A lot of people have suggested that we have tuition for short term until we can pay for it. Well, we already know from all of the user fees and everything else, it never goes away.
That's right.
That's true. And I think Sal, actually, Sal.
Thank you. And just to bring up what Mary France is also going to talk about is if you had full-day kindergarten, that would contribute to the Chapter 70 amount that we would receive. So we would actually increase the monies that we would get from the state if we had full-day kindergarten.
Right. Yes, Barbara?
I just want to point out the vast majority of communities do not charge tuition.
Right.
You'll find that the communities that do charge tuition are kind of located along the 128 belt, the wealthier communities. But for the most part, if you look across the state, and those are communities, the small communities that have full-day kindergarten, there's no tuition.
Right.
So,
sure.
It's not
Thank you. Okay. Kathy, hold on one moment.
I don't want to really take it. I think that if you charge tuition, it affects your grant ability, too. I could be wrong on that regard, but in the past, if you were going to get this amount of a grant and you were going to charge, then that minimized your grant potential. So I'm sure they'll factor that into how they do it. But I think it would be nice if Chelmsford could be a destination community for excellence in education, and also that your child could start in kindergarten and go all the way through, not just as we were being portrayed recently in conversations as a destination for special education. So it'd be great to have a nice mixture.
All right, great. Thank you, Kathy. Yes, Evelyn?
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing as far as the full-day kindergarten, when we were going back, just in terms of some details. When they did the analysis on the Chapter 70, it was not a significant number. We thought it would be, and it would help offset things, but it wasn't. When we did the numbers, we'll have to do them again. The second piece is if you offer it as tuition, you have to offer a free half-day program. One of the biggest concerns we have is space, which is going to kind of transition into the next topic, as far as what we would do and where we would do it, because our elementary schools wouldn't allow us to do things in a nice, even way in order to have all of the students in the particular districts go to that particular school. It would have to be some other arrangement, and transportation costs were a key factor in determining what we were going to do. So there's a lot of other details, but as we go forward, maybe new things will arise, and it will make it a lot simpler to be able to implement this program.
Great. And that might actually be a good segue, unless anyone has any final questions for Paul on the fiscal 17 forecast. We may be able to transition it to Dr. Lang. He's going to discuss the comprehensive facility assessment.
Sure, thank you. One of the initiatives that I've been speaking with the school committee about, and I spearheaded in my prior community, was a comprehensive facilities assessment of really all of our educational spaces. And I mentioned that to the committee members about bringing a similar process here to Chelmsford. Over the course of about 8 or 10 months or so, my prior district engaged the services of an architect engineering firm to come in and actually assess all of our existing school buildings and any educational spaces that we wanted them to as part of this study. It was a comprehensive assessment in that it looked at all of the existing systems in the building, so your mechanical systems, your roofs structurally, windows, doors for security and threat assessments. It was a complete assessment of buildings. It also took into consideration the existing configuration of the building spaces to see if we're using them for the best uses, grade level configurations, feeder patterns among schools going from elementary to middle to high school. It lined up the existing conditions within the buildings against MSBA standards for buildings because, again, in my prior district, we knew we were looking for a new school, but also some significant enhancements to other particular buildings. And by having a third party come in and kind of work through that process with you, we knew the MSBA was going to be a significant partner and funding source for some of our improvements. So when you actually have some really kind of hard evidence when you go to them with your application, typically you get a more favorable response and oftentimes quicker as well. So we wanted to actually take our existing spaces, line them up against the SBA standards, and then make an argument for where we wanted our schools to go. And one of the things that I've found, and as we've been doing our tours here in Chelmsford, some issues have been talked about for a bit. So obviously we need to find space within our buildings for the full-day kindergarten program when it's going to be implemented. Ideally, a full-day kindergarten program would be implemented in the existing building that the children would stay in. It's not optimal to operate a separate kind of full-day kindergarten site and then transition to the primary building that they would go to. And it's very nice in Chelmsford geographically where students go by neighborhood to schools. Transitions are very difficult for kids, so the least number of transitions you can have and the ability to kind of build that sense of community is really valuable to the education process. So if we can find a way for our kindergarten children to actually enroll at the school that they're going to go to first, second, third, fourth grade with before they have to make that middle school transition, that would be optimal. Having the assistance of another group come in and actually help us work through that, if we were to identify specific needs within buildings, they may be able to help us actually line up some funding sources for those needs. In addition to the kindergarten route, we also, have modular classrooms at several of our schools that really need to be assessed, and we need to have a longer-term plan as to how we're going to address those spaces. The modulars have a useful life, and you really can't expect them to function as permanent buildings. They've been in place for quite some time. The town does a very nice job of trying to maintain them, but they still have a useful life that's nearing the end of its expectancy. There's been a lot of talk, and even as I toured some of the middle schools, our science labs at the middle school level are outdated, and I know they were included in prior plans for capital that didn't ultimately go forward, but the need is still there. So my purpose for bringing this forward was to have the committee really work with the town, because this wouldn't be an isolated school department function. And I think the way you really kind of get buy-in and actually get to the point where you're going to implement the plan is by being very inclusive in the process and having a lot of the different stakeholders at the table throughout the process. So we would actually put together a working group that would be probably 12 to 15 people that would be comprised of school department staff, town staff, parents, as well as community members that don't even particularly have students in the district. That group would actually kind of oversee the process as it went forward. We would put an RFP out to hire an architect or an engineering firm to actually work with us to complete the study. That working group would probably meet bi-weekly and actually receive, so there is a time commitment involved in that, but they would meet and actually receive feedback as the process went along. We would take a look at student enrollment projections for the next 10 years to make sure that we're actually, whatever spaces we're going to build or build out, would be able to accommodate any of the anticipated growth or realignment of students within the district. And over the course of probably, again, because it's smaller, it's primarily 7 school facilities, 8 when you add on the Westlands. We would look at the central admin office as well. And then actually that the 101 Mill Road property was discussed, so we would throw that into the look. So you'd be looking at those 10 facilities. It would probably take about 6 months or so. Hopefully by the time you got later into the spring, you would have some draft and then final reports. And this would actually help produce a 10-year capital plan for the school department and the town to work on to bring our facilities to where we would want them to be. I can't tell you at this point where we want them to be because you need that community input, and you really need to kind of have some visioning sessions ahead of time to figure out what direction we want our schools to go in. But that is something I shared with the school committee. They unanimously approved the issuing of an RFP at the last meeting, so we're actually working to refine that. Our hope would be working with town manager and the various boards to get approval at town meeting this fall to be able to fund that study. It's anticipated to cost somewhere between $175,000 to $200,000. I think we put $200,000 as the not to exceed number in the study. But if we actually issue the RFP, receive funding at town meeting, and then actually had an award in place, the project could begin around November 1st. And again, over a 6-month time period, you'd be looking at April, May. Hopefully by the end of the school year, everything would be finalized before we left for the summer. And then that would be a guide to help us for the next 10 years figure out educationally where we wanted to go with our facilities.
Great. No, thank you. Questions for the superintendent?
Just a comment, Dr. Lang. The stuff you said at the beginning, like the infrastructure, the electrical, and that's all been done. All the boiler systems and everything. We did that under the ESCO, right?
We did the HVAC systems and the energy systems, right?
I think, Bob, if I could, before you go on, maybe as an addendum to the RFQ or the RFP that you put out, we could include some of the other plans we've done recently in the buildings just to help the architects, if that's what you're sort of suggesting.
Well, I'm kind of saying
Gary's compiled over the last decade. Gary Perschetti, Facilities Director, Public Works Director, he's provided to Jay already all the whole data of all the work we've done in the schools in the last decade. So that will be input that
right,
they
so
have as they move forward.
They won't come in and say we need new bathrooms. We've already done that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the last time we did a comprehensive study, they came in with a $133 million project. No way could fly, so that's just my comment.
Sure. Any other? Yes.
I think what this also does, Paul, is gives us an opportunity, creates that roadmap that everyone is looking for the next 10 years. There'll be no guesswork. The town will and the taxpayers know exactly what's taking place, what our schools need over the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm. That should be a good benefit. Any other questions or comments on the facility assessment? Oh, yes.
Just to clarify, you were saying that we'd issue an award on RFP by November 1st is your goal?
On or about. We actually were going to be issuing the RFP within the next week to week and a half, depending on the advertisement deadlines. It'll be issued in anticipation of receiving the approval at town meeting. The bid would probably close probably that week of town meeting if everything worked out well. be a few weeks of review, but on or about November 1st, we would actually be making a recommendation.
Okay, so that was my question on the crunch time as part of when you're issuing and when
I didn't
it'd be
want to
funded.
lose 3 or 4 weeks of time,
Yeah.
so we'd be issuing now because it actually does, we give the vendors a few extra weeks in the preparation of their proposals. This is a little more extensive than just a traditional bid. And then the review also is a little heavier as well.
Mhm. Okay,
But
thank
the
you.
goal would be around November 1st to be able to actually award a contract and begin work.
Was there another question over here? No? All right. Any other questions for Dr. Lang? All right, seeing none, why don't we move on to the next agenda item? Number 6, discussion item on the turf field revenue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As recently as the last Board of Selectmen meeting, the issue recurred again about the turf field revenue. When the projects were proposed to the community and approved by town meeting, there was, in that with the indications that we would be accumulating sufficient reserves so that when the field surface needed to be replaced in a decade or so, that the funds would be there to replace that surface. Now, we don't know, and we explained at the time, we don't know if that'll be 10 years, 12 years, whatever. But but we do know that by our second year in now into the field surface, that we've really not made much headway in terms of a reserve fund for that purpose. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. And so it was thought that the appropriate place to bring this would be at the tri-board meeting. Now, I recognize that the school department and the administration, are responsible for the scheduling and rental of those fields, and then obviously the town public works facilities is responsible for the maintenance of those fields, and that's how that system goes. So we really wanted to bring this to this forum into seeing are there any indications, and I know it's early for you, but are there any indications that this trend is, will change in terms of now that we sort of got our legs under us, as we now entering our third season on these fields? So I think that's the purpose of the discussion this evening. If Janet can maybe wish to elaborate more on it.
In all fairness, I'm the one who's brought up this issue because I was with the town manager and some other folks here on the turf field committee, and it was my understanding through our discussions and through our presentation to the finance committee that these monies would be set aside each year from the revenues of the rentals, and I'm not seeing that happening, so I'd like to bring awareness to that. And I had also mentioned at the last Board of Selectmen meeting that perhaps we should reconvene or put together again the turf field committee, maybe a little smaller this time, to take a look at the field rentals. Are they being rented as we expected? Is there anything we can do, as a town to support that, to get more revenues in? And also, what are we going to do to start setting monies aside so that in another 8, 10, or 12 years, we're not bonding approximately $1 million?
Yes.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I was wondering if anybody has given a thought to possibly hiring on a part-time basis somebody who's a marketeer that does this type of thing, rents things out, because I think that right now it's in the hands of the athletic director or whoever else is in that particular department, and it may be too much for them to handle. I think if we have somebody who's schooled in doing this, knows all the ropes, it might be better for the town, and it might not cost us a lot of money. I wouldn't expect to hire somebody on a full-time basis. It would be a part-time basis for them to go out and to search around and to advertise whatever it may cost to get more rentals into the facility, because as Janet says, we have a twofold process. First of all, you have to pay the debt, and secondly, you have to put aside the money to. Excuse me. You all right?
Continue, yeah.
Okay, you have to pay the debt, and secondly, we have to also put aside monies to replace the carpet in the next 10 years or so. So I think we have to make sure that those monies are coming in, and we're not coming up with a shortfall.
If I could really quickly.
Can I start with this?
Please.
Well,
I was just gonna.
Mike, before you get excited, this isn't just so you know, this isn't a criticism. This is a concern that I don't see that the fields are being rented as we expected, and I understand we're just getting started And this isn't really an attack on anyone's
no, no.
performance,
I can let
but
you
I do
speak.
think
Mike,
it's something that we need to address.
It's not an attack, but I do want to go back and examine the presumption that there's an expectation, a realistic expectation, that we're going to pay for the entire cost of a new carpet at the same time we're paying for the cost of the current carpet. And I think if you go back and look at the presentation to town meeting, and that's right, you did, and the finance committee did not approve the purchase. The presentation to town meeting, which was the body that approved the bonding, was quite clear, and the comparison, the explicit comparison, was to Acton Boxborough, which brought in $178,000 a year. I think it was 178.5. And what we were told by Mr. Moreau was that if you took a rather conservative, to use his term, estimate based on renting out a third of the available field hours to outside organizations, he was projecting a revenue of $142,000 a year from the two fields. We are not that far off from $142,000 a year right now. At $142,000 a year, we cannot. That's not sufficient to pay off the current bond and to raise $1 million or $1.2 million for the next carpet. That's like saying I have to pay my car note off, and at the same time I have to put enough money away so that I can buy my next car. At the same time, I get rid of my old car. Why don't you just finance a second car as well? If we're paying off the cost of this field, we're deriving value from the surface. I don't understand why it's a problem to do it again 10 years from now.
I don't have the presentation in front of me. I'd need to review the video of town meeting, but I remember the discussions of the committee. I know it was presented to finance committee, and my opinion is that was a thought all along, is that these monies would be set aside so that we would not be bonding $1 million. Now, we can sit here and argue about this all night, but I don't have it in front of me.
You just check the tape. I know, you can go back and check the tape.
I will go back and check the tape.
That was what was put in front of town meeting. Let's take it another step, though, because, again, we're not having a disagreement. We're having a discussion.
But this is why I was suggesting we have a turf field committee of, people from each one of these so that we can address this.
I'm not.
Or we can be here all night.
Yeah,
disagreeing with that. But I'd like to point out further that if you want to put the kind of money away that you need to put away to buy another turf surface at the end of if you figure a 10 to 12 year lifetime for the current surface, you need to be booking something like $220,000 a year. Well, now,
not necessarily.
Excuse me.
We need to go back.
Wait a minute.
Making misstatements, and it's
Nobody's making misstatements, Bob. I'm telling you what was said at town meeting. Now, I am telling you the results of my research into what it would cost based on these numbers. You need about $220,000, maybe $250,000 a year to do this. If you accept the fact that renting a third of the usable hours gives you $142,000 a year, now you're talking about renting 50 or 60% of the usable hours to outside organizations. That is going to conflict with time on the turf for the local sports organizations and for the school organizations.
I can drive by that field any day or night, and let me tell you, those fields are not fully utilized.
I think there's, maybe some questions
There
to
is
still be
time
answered tonight.
available. Not being
And
done.
I think Janet's proposed that we put this committee together. What I would like is maybe for the school committee, if you could, to have a discussion amongst yourselves on how you would like to move forward, maybe in a few weeks, just so we can have some type of closure plan moving forward. If you could let us know whether you would be interested in having some type of committee or partnership to look into this again, or if you're okay with the current status and you don't want to do that, just so you can give us some guidance, because it's been brought up at a few meetings. I don't think we have the answer tonight, but if you could talk amongst yourselves and let us know if you have a plan moving forward or what that plan is, or if you do just plan to bond the money again. I mean, whatever your decision is your decision, but if you could just talk about it and let us know what you come up with, that'd be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, Paul, have we paid the bond for the first 2 years on time?
Yes, John can answer better than I can.
Yes, they have been paid. And just to add this information, because I know this has come up before, for the fiscal year 16, the debt service for the that's paid out of the revolving fund. The total is $106,600 for the fiscal year that we're in.
Okay, I just want.
Sorry.
Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
If you take if you take that and then you take the I think just doing a quick review of last year's, I think the turf revenue was somewhere around in Darlene's report about 130,000 or so. If you take the projection that was done at town meeting, so it's about 12,000 less than the projection, but the whole idea is up till now there hasn't been a lot of extra revenue. But if you're spending 107,000, if we want to use round numbers on debt service, you should have at least 25,000 available to put away. So I think the concern is going forward there should be some money available to put.
I agree, John, and I just want to point out, and certainly to Tom's point, first of all, I agree 100%, Tom. If we could start, the three boards start talking about some kind of an idea to bring maybe a part-time person in. Why? Because other communities might have one field to lease, and that might not be as difficult as it sounds, but we have two fields. Right, so we have an athletic director that was hired to make sure that our kids have the best experience they can, and unfortunately, he now spends, including Sundays, in renting turf fields, because when those calls come in, if you don't react to them very quickly, to your point, we lose that revenue. So I just want to say one more point. Sure. The fields opened up in September, I think, Paul, of 2 years ago. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, so we actually made the bond the first year and we started late. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, because we only had an interest payment that first year.
And if anybody wants to know the truth, exactly, and if anybody wants to know, and I think everybody will agree in this room, that we had an unprecedented amount of snow this year, where we typically would be on the fields a little earlier generating revenue. So the first year, Gina, to your point, and I agree with you, we could have that discussion. The first year we started late. We weren't activating the fields until late September to generate revenue. This year we couldn't even get on the fields, as a matter of fact, because of the amount of snow. So hopefully we can take that into consideration. Also look at the point of view that Tom just mentioned as far as a part-time person. Why? 2 fields is a lot of work for our AED to do that with what's happening with all the other students and to take care of them. So allow us to kind of reconvene, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman, for jumping on.
And again, if that's part of your plan and you do make that decision and you want to bring some type of plan about that back to us so we know what you're doing.
Allow us to have that conversation, Mr. Chairman, and we'll get back to you with the right information, sir.
Actually, if I could, I think he had his hand up.
Well, can we just clarify, that first year was just an interest payment,
Yes,
correct?
it was an interest payment of $23,000
Thank
the
you.
first year.
$23,000.
I just have a point to make. The replacement costs will not be as high as the initial costs were, because the infrastructure has already been laid for the field. The only thing you'd be replacing is the carpeting itself. And I'm not sure what a function that is of the total price, but I would guess that it's probably not even half. And if it is, then you're probably talking about, if you're talking about inflation, maybe you're talking about something in the vicinity of maybe $650,000 over that particular course,
I'm just
period
using
of
the
time.
number that the town manager.
Yeah,
maybe we could get a quote.
We spent over $2 million on the whole project.
Yeah, the infrastructure was the big cost.
I'm just using the
Yeah,
number
I
that
understand.
the town manager gave
I understand.
for
I understand. We know what the town manager gave you the number, and that's okay.
I also think it's important to understand that the life of the field was just a guess.
Right.
So if the life of the fields, and this is good and bad, because if they're not being used a lot right now, well, then we have a longer life. So if you just give us an opportunity to get back to you, we'll get all that information, but and then we can make a determination if a committee maybe needs to or is warranted.
One more, Bob, if I could. I think one more factor that played into the amount of being able to pay back the note wasn't only in rentals. I think there were naming rights and other things. If you were to rented out both fields, $25,000 apiece, and got an extra $50,000 a year, it would make it a lot easier to put $100,000 away towards the $1 million 10 years down the road. So I think that was part of the conversation, and I know there's you guys have been working on that and having some conversations about it, but yeah, so it was going to be a combination of
Tom's
things.
point, we're still getting our fee. I mean, we've just gone through one full year.
Yeah. Right. Bob did have a question.
Yeah, I want to repeat one of the things I said at town meeting when we voted on this, and that is that there are a lot more turf fields out there to market to people in the private sector. I understand that Westford has 3, Paul, do you know?
I think so.
Is it 3? Now Neshoba Tech has one.
Yes, they do.
Everybody around us has them, so the competition is more. And I brought that up at town meeting as an issue, and I was assured, oh, no, it's not going to be an issue. We get all these clubs that want to come in. So I don't want to say I told you so.
We paid the bond so far, Bob.
Yeah,
Not to
because-
say you told us so.
Yeah.
You can say you told us so. That's not a bad
did,
point.
Bob. We
And
were
it's one
first
of the
time.
reasons that
did.
that Scott was conservative in his estimate. He didn't try to shoot the moon. He said 142,000 a year.
And Bob, just to let you know that, we don't disagree that there are more turf fields. We feel we have intangibles in the town of Chelmsford, access, parking, right off the highway, that is better than anyone else's. We just have to go out there and market it the right way and work a little harder. We don't care that there are more turf fields. We just want to work harder.
I think you're
So-
right. Marketing is the key, right?
That's
there.
right.
So I know it's a little bit of a busy time. Can we say maybe within, you meet every 2 weeks, within 2 months, could you maybe report back to us? Give you 2 or 3 meetings to have a chance to talk about this? And if if you don't have a decision by then, that's fine, but I'm just trying to think of a time frame where we may be able to hear back what you've discussed. And if you need more time to discuss it, that's fine, but
This is, I was just going to say, this is not a new topic for our discussion, either in subcommittees or in some full committee time. We have discussed particularly the idea of having help with marketing. One of the seasons that has not produced as much revenue as we would like is the summer, but I think there's potential to expand sales, during that time particularly. So this isn't new. I think the idea of a committee is an excellent one because, for example, you just brought up the point of advertising. Well, when the committee was functioning, we were more on top of, what was going on. As things get going, the questions about rules for the facility and monitoring the facility to make sure everything's, so it doesn't turn into a pit because when everybody, when people leave, they got to pick everything up and all those kinds of things. So I think the idea of having a support group to kind of handle all of those issues, which continue to come up. I mean, the fields are used heavily, and it's been a blessing for our students. But I would support the idea of a committee.
Maybe we could, Mr. Chairman, if it's your will, maybe what we can do is we can convene, and over the next couple of 3 months, to the chairman's point, we could get back to them with the.
I think we can do it in a shorter period of time.
That'd be
but
great.
I'm confident. So thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Thank you. Any other comments on the turf field? Seeing none, I believe that was the last action item, if I'm correct, before asking for press questions. Any other comments? Are there any press questions this evening? You're all set. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Well, seeing none. Seeing none, we'll move on. Would anyone like to make a motion to enter executive session between the Board of Selectmen and School Committee for the purpose of strategy with respect to...
Oh, yeah, any public comment before we go into executive session?
Sorry, we didn't have that list on the agenda, but are there any public comments this evening? You can certainly entertain some. All right, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we go into executive session. I believe it's going to be the school committee and the Board of Selectmen only.
Correct, yeah.
For the purposes of strategy with respect to collective bargaining for fiscal year 17 through 19, and not to return to open session.
Is there a second?
She's second.
Okay, and we, I believe, we need a roll call vote for
Yes.
this, correct? Bob, do you want to start?
Yeah, aye.
Just go down the line.
Might as well head in that direction.
Aye.
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 To go into executive session? Al?
Al said aye.
Al said aye. Coming around.
George.
George? Aye. All right, it's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.